fourth graders. I hope you enjoyed the beautiful day yesterday. It got up to over 70 degrees. That's so exciting. Today, I decided to do my read aloud outside. And you know what? You can listen to this read aloud outside too, because as the weather gets nicer, you can do some of your distance learning outside. So if you remember from yesterday, we ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, and the question was, wait a minute, said Pete, are you suggesting Henry was murdered? Doc hesitated a moment before answering, yes. Despite the heat from the lamps all around me, I felt a chill go up my spine. The possibility that Henry had been murdered alarmed me, though I have to admit, there was something exciting about it too. Martin wasn't nearly as shocked by the idea. Instead, he seemed pretty annoyed. That's ridiculous, he huffed. Why would anyone want to murder Henry? I'm not saying it was done maliciously, Doc replied. Quite likely it was an accident. You've seen what our guests throw into Henry's mouth. They think it's funny. Maybe someone threw in this sharp thing, whatever it was, as a joke, not realizing it would kill him. So that's what you think I should tell the news? Pete asked incredulously, that our beloved mascot was killed by one of our guests? He wasn't exactly beloved. Pete didn't even wait for Doc to finish his thought. Forget about it. If I go out there and tell the press Henry was murdered, they'll think I'm insane. Well, don't use the word murder. If a guest did this to him, the public should know. They should understand that when you throw garbage into an animal's mouth, that animals could die. I think that's a bad idea, Martin said. Why? Doc sounded incredulous. It makes us sound like we're running a shoddy zoo. It's bad enough Henry died so soon after our grand opening. If we say one of our own guests killed him, the animal rights activists are going to go ballistic. Ballistic is a word for crazy. It's a good word for crazy. They'll ask why we allowed people to throw things in his mouth, why we didn't put up barriers to keep that from happening. Well, we'll just get accused of animal abuse or cutting corners to get the park open on time. We can't take any chances, Martin turned to Pete. Tell the press Henry died of natural causes. He'd had a rough life at the circus. We knew that when he brought him here. But we'd hoped he still had more years left in him. At least his final months were happy ones, though. You got it. Pete was out the door before Doc could protest. After he was gone, there was a heavy silence. I stood as still as I could, astonished by everything I'd witnessed. It was shocking enough to hear that Henry had been killed, but Martin's desire to keep it secret really stunned me. It was the first time I'd realized that Fun Jungle was being run like a corporation, rather than a zoo. Finally, Doc said, "There's also the possibility that someone killed Henry on purpose." "Why would someone do that?" Martin snapped. "I think you know." There was a long silence, as though Martin was carefully weighing what to say next. Meanwhile, I could barely contain myself. I wanted to shout at the top of my lungs, to ask who they thought killed Henry and why. But I didn't, and to my disappointment, Martin didn't take the bait. Instead, he snapped off his goggles and headed for the door. "That's preposterous. No one would be crazy enough to murder a hippo." "People do lots of crazy things." Martin tapped his foot rapidly. "Something I noticed he did when he got nervous. Henry died of natural causes," he said finally. "That's what I want to see in your report. No accusations of murder, no crackpot conspiracy theories, natural causes. End of story." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Neither could Doc. "Let me get this straight," he said. I could hear the aggravation in his voice. "Someone may have killed our mascot, the most famous animal in the entire country, and you want me to cover it up?" "Yes, that's exactly what I want," said Martin. "But that's a direct order. Do it or there'll be consequences." It was a long time before Doc said anything. Even though I couldn't see him, I could feel the tension in the room. I wasn't sure what consequences Martin had in mind, but Doc seemed troubled by them. When he finally spoke again, he sounded very tired. "All right," he said. "I'll bury it." Chapter 4, Home. It took Doc a lot longer to finish with Henry than I'd expected, even though Martin remained in the auditorium, interrupting his phone calls now and then to prod Doc or complain about how much time he was taking. Doc still insisted upon doing an autopsy properly. He went through Henry's intestines inch by inch. A full-size grown hippo has more than 60 feet of intestine. The whole time he was doing it, I had to stay up in the catwalk trying to stay silent. My legs began to cramp terribly, although that was nothing compared to the pain I felt in my bladder. I drank a lot of water before the autopsy, and now all I wanted was to get back out again. Of course, the more I tried not to think about it, the more I thought about it, until ultimately I felt like I was going to explode. It was torture. I think we've all been there before, especially on long car trips. The more you don't want to think about it, the more you have to think about it. Meanwhile, Doc just kept poking along like examining hippo intestines was the greatest fun you could have ever had. I couldn't tell for sure how many holes Doc found, but I knew from his occasional comments to himself that it was more than 100. To his annoyance, however, he never found what he was really looking for, the object that made the holes. "Come on, where are you?" he asked repeatedly and ultimately grumbled, "Man, must have gotten pooped back out." By 9:30, I'd been hiding for exactly 3 hours. I was just about ready to cry "Uncle" and blow my cover when, to my incredible relief, Martin finally goaded Doc out of the auditorium. Doc still wanted to sift through the contents of Henry's stomach, but Martin convinced him it could wait until the next day. And I think even Doc was getting nauseous after rooting through Henry's innards for so long. The moment they were out the door, I scrambled down and booked for the exit. I really wanted to look into Henry's belly and see some of the perforated intestines close up, but I couldn't spare another second. The auditorium door automatically locked behind me as I dashed out. I don't think a cheetah could have run to the nearest bathroom as fast as I did. Once I'd taken care of my business, however, I still had some things to deal with. I was starving, and my mother was surely ready to kill me for coming home late. Mom always expected me home by 8 for dinner. She didn't much care what I did before then. The park was so far from civilization, she figured I couldn't get into a whole lot of trouble. Usually I was home well before dinner time. In fact, I'd never been late before, so I ran back as fast as I could. At night, I could make much better time through the park because the crowds were gone. I had the wide promenades all to myself. It was like running through the streets of a ghost town. It wasn't quiet, though. Many animals are most active after dusk and early evening. In fact, normal zoo hours, right in the heat of the day, are practically the worst time to see animals in action. That's when they prefer to nap. Now as I ran, I could hear animals all around, calling, growling, rolling, chirping, croaking, trumpeting. The night was alive with noise. There were still a few park employees about, mostly cleaning staff and groundkeepers. J.J. McCracken wanted his park spotless when the gates opened every morning. At night, every piece of trash got picked up, every railing polished, every hedge trimmed. I'd been around Fun Jungle long enough that the cleaners knew me, so no one called security to report that a family had forgotten their children. The trailer park where we lived was behind the back fence right next to the employee parking lot. In the daytime, it was hideously ugly. Rather than being organized in a sensible fashion, all the trailers had been placed where the land was the flattest. It looked like they'd been scattered by a passing tornado. At one time, some of the landscaping had been attempted and quickly forgotten. Now only patches of crabgrass grew among prickly pear cactus and a few stubborn cedar trees. The single amenity J.J. McCracken had provided us all with was a hot tub, which was totally useless, seeing as the temperature outside was often more than 100 degrees. At night, however, the trailer park was far more welcoming. Since the closest town was so far away, the mobile homes looked kind of like a tight frontier community in the midst of a vast wilderness. There was something comforting about the warm glow of the light from the windows. The sky above was one of the few places left in the United States that was free of light pollution. On that moonless night, I could see millions of stars, and the Milky Way was a bright slash across the sky. We lived in the farthest trailer from Fun Jungle, right on the edge of the wilderness. White-tailed deer wandered past our home every day, and a herd of 6 was grazing by the front steps as I returned, but they scattered at the sight of me. I could hear the TV, which was surprising. Mom rarely turned it on. She was so used to living without one. After all her time in Africa, she often forgot we even had one. She didn't like it much, calling it the idiot box and preferring that we read or play games to pass the time. It took a special kind of person to become a field biologist, and my mom was one of the best. I'm not just saying that. She's won all sorts of awards for conservation organizations, and sometimes there was a magazine article about her. Important scientists lined up to say how great she was. She was really smart, but also tough enough to deal with the hardships of living far from civilization. In the Congo, she'd faced hungry lions, rampaging elephants, blood-sucking leeches, and dangerous of all, poachers. She was incredibly patient. When she began her research, she watched her gorillas 12 hours a day, every day, for an entire year until they finally began to accept her as one of their own. After spending so long out there, she felt the gorillas were her family. It wasn't like she was putting them in a competition with me, though. In fact, I thought it was nice. You couldn't find another biologist in the world who cared more about her subjects. That's where we're going to end it today. Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow to see what happens next.